Hi, this is David Lockretz with FindMyMusicTeacher.com. Today I'm going to talk about intervals. An interval is the distance between any two notes. They're measured in half steps, which is the smallest building block in Western music, and every interval has a certain number of half steps and a certain sound, and the goal is to be able to recognize that sound. It can help you when you're figuring out songs by ear. It can also help you if you're taking an ear training class or a theory class. And I'm going to play you some songs that use each interval from the half step all the way up to the octave, which is 12, and hopefully it's going to help you get the sound in your head. We start off with the minor second, also just one half step. So a good example of that is the theme from Jaws, which everyone knows. Another good example that's probably familiar is the Pink Panther. Those first two notes is your minor second. The major second is two half steps, also called a whole step. Imagine that, two halves make a whole. And a good example of that comes from Queen. We Will Rock You. And then that brings us now to the minor third, which is three half steps. The Canadian Anthem. Good example there. And another more contemporary example is Axel F by Harold Faltermeyer. So forth. A lot of you know that from either Beverly Hills Cop or Crazy Frog. Now the major third is four half steps. A good example of that is this one. So forth, and also the Spring Concerto by Vivaldi. So there you go. That brings us to the perfect fourth. Fourths and fifths are said not to be major or minor, but perfect or augmented or diminished. And the perfect fourth is five half steps, and it sounds a little something like this. That brings us now to the tritone, also called an augmented fourth or a diminished fifth, which sounds a little bit weird, but there are a few songs that use it. If you watch The Simpsons, every time that show comes on the air, you hear this. And so anytime that your parents give you guilt for watching too much TV, you can just tell them that you're studying for your ear training exam. Another good example of the tritone comes from the band Rush and their instrumental YYZ. So forth. That brings us now to the perfect fifth. Now this next one needs absolutely no introduction. There you go. Another John Williams theme from E.T. also uses the perfect fifth. Moving right along to the minor sixth, which is eight half steps. A good example comes from that band that Paul McCartney was in before. Oh yeah, the Beatles. Yeah, that's the word I'm looking for. In My Life, the very beginning. That first two notes, again, representing the minor sixth. Another good example is the Latin jazz classic Black Orpheus. A lot of you might be familiar with that one. Good movie, too. That brings us now to the major sixth, and again, to recap our television theme, the theme from NBC, perfect example of a major sixth, which is nine half steps. Another good example from the Billy Strayhorn jazz classic, not Duke Ellington now, Billy Strayhorn actually wrote it. I know Duke made it famous, but the beginning of Take the A Train. And one more jazz example is also by Mancini, Days of Wine and Roses. So those are a few examples of the major sixth. The minor seventh has 10 half steps, and it's kind of an unusual one, but a good example comes from Steely Dan in the beginning of Josie. And so forth. So those first two notes, minor seventh. The major seventh is even more unusual. That's 11 half steps. An example that's often used is Bali High from South Pacific, which isn't actually a major seventh though. It goes up to the octave, then it goes down a half step. But a true major seventh is in the middle of another Mancini theme, Moon River. I'll play it from the beginning so you get the idea. Right over there, when I go from that C up to that B, that's a major seventh. It's one that doesn't come up a whole lot, but it's good to know. That brings us to the octave, which is more recognizable, such as in this case. Which I'm assuming some of you have probably heard that one at one point in your life. And then more contemporary examples. So forth. And then another more rockin' example. So forth. Immigrant Song, that last one is. So those are some examples of how you can use these intervals, or you can use songs rather, to figure out how an interval sounds. Hopefully you find this helpful. Feel free to email me, david@findmymusicteacher.com, if you have any suggestions for other songs I could put in here. I'm always looking for ways to keep the material fresh and more relevant. I appreciate you watching. I hope you find the video helpful, and have a great day. Bye.